The high school chemistry teacher recognized the smell immediately. Ammonium nitrate burning at temperatures that would make it unstable. But when he ran toward the docks shouting for evacuation, longshoremen laughed and told him to relax. It was just fertilizer. 17 minutes later, the SS Grandcamp exploded with a force equivalent to 2.5 kilotons of TNT. The chemistry teacher survived. He had made it 3 blocks before the blast wave threw him through a storefront window. The longshoremen who laughed at him were vaporized so completely that only 7 of the ship's crew of 41 were ever identified. Most left no remains at all. This is the story of America's deadliest industrial disaster. A disaster caused not by accident, but by a series of deliberate decisions that prioritized cargo over human life. Decisions that transformed a routine ship fire into an explosion heard 150 miles away. But before we understand how it happened, we need to understand where it happened, and why 500 people gathered to watch what they thought was just another dockside fire. April 16, 1947. Texas City, Texas. 10 miles from Galveston on the Gulf Coast. The morning dawned clear and crisp, cooled by a brisk 20-mile-per-hour north wind. Temperature, 56 degrees. Unseasonably cool for mid-April in Texas. Texas City was booming. In 1940, the population had been just 5,700. By 1947, it had exploded to over 16,000. The war had transformed this sleepy shore town into an industrial powerhouse. Oil refineries, chemical plants, shipping terminals. Monsanto Chemical Company, Union Carbide, Republic Oil Refining. The port was handling 2,500 ships per year. Young men returned from the war, unskilled, looking for work, bringing their families to live in hastily built housing near the waterfront. Schools ran in shifts because there weren't enough teachers. People rented floor space. Slept in their cars. Houses were being built as fast as lumber could be delivered. It was a boomtown. And like all boomtowns, safety was an afterthought. On the morning of April 16th, a ship sat docked at Pier O in the North Slip. The SS Grandcamp. 437 feet long. A Liberty ship, one of the mass-produced cargo vessels that had won the war in the Pacific. Built in Los Angeles in 1942 as the SS Benjamin R. Curtis. She had served in the Pacific Theater, been mothballed in Philadelphia after the war, then given to the French line as part of America's effort to rebuild Europe. The French had renamed her after the beach at Normandy, Grandcamp les Bains, where American and British forces had fought their way ashore 3 years earlier. Now she was back in America, loading cargo to take home to France. Cargo that would help French farmers rebuild their agriculture. Fertilizer. But this fertilizer had a history. What was sitting in the holds of the Grandcamp that morning had been manufactured at United States Army ordnance plants in Iowa and Nebraska. During the war, it had been explosive. TNT. Bombs. Artillery shells. The chemical formula, NH4NO3. Ammonium nitrate. After the war, they diluted it, mixed it with other compounds, and called it fertilizer. The Army's own Ordnance Safety Manual listed ammonium nitrate as a high explosive. But prevailing scientific opinion in 1947 held that fertilizer-grade ammonium nitrate was inert. Safe. Would not catch fire or explode under what they called ordinary conditions. The conditions aboard the Grandcamp that morning were about to become extraordinary. The ship had arrived 5 days earlier on April 11th. Loading began April 14. The cargo was packed into 100-pound paper bags, mixed with rosin, petroleum, and paraffin to prevent caking during the transatlantic voyage. The bags were loaded into hold number 2 and hold number 4. By the morning of April 16, 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer sat in the Grandcamp's holds. Another 600 tons were scheduled to be loaded that morning. The longshoremen noticed something odd. The bags were warm to the touch. They mentioned it to their supervisors. The supervisors shrugged. It had been warm in the railcars coming from Iowa and Nebraska. The fertilizer had been sitting in storage. Nothing to worry about. But what no one understood, what no one could have known, was that those warm temperatures had increased the chemical reactivity of the compound. The bags weren't just warm. They were primed. Later in this story, you'll hear how that heat combined with a single cigarette and the captain's decision to create a chain reaction that would obliterate an entire port. But first, you need to understand what else was in that ship. The Grandcamp wasn't just carrying fertilizer. She was carrying 16 cases of small arms ammunition loaded in Belgium, 59,000 bales of sisal binder twine, 380 bales of cotton, 9,334 bags of shelled peanuts, oil field equipment, refrigeration machinery, farm equipment, and critically, between hold number 3 and hold number 4, sat a fuel oil bunker. This detail will become important. Remember it. The ship's master was Captain Charles de Guillaumin. French. Experienced. He commanded a crew of 41 men. The Grandcamp's engine was undergoing repairs while docked, which meant the vessel was inoperable. She couldn't move under her own power. She was stuck at Pier O, held in place by mooring lines, surrounded by chemical plants and oil refineries. 600 feet away, in the main slip, sat another ship. The SS High Flyer. She was also loading ammonium nitrate. 961 tons of it. Plus 1,800 tons of sulfur. No one gave the High Flyer much thought that morning. By the next day, they would wish they had. Just before 8 a.m., longshoremen removed the hatch covers on hold number 4. They were preparing to load the final 600 tons of fertilizer. Several longshoremen descended into the hold and waited for the first pallets holding the 100-pound packages to be hoisted from dockside. Then someone smelled smoke. A plume was observed rising between the cargo holds and the ship's hull. Apparently about 7 or 8 layers of sacks down. Not much. Just a thin wisp. The longshoremen tried to handle it themselves. 1-gallon jug of drinking water. 2 fire extinguishers supplied by crew members. Neither had any effect. The cargo hold filled with smoke rapidly. Thick, choking smoke that made it impossible to see or breathe. The longshoremen were ordered out of the hold. While Leonard Boswell, the gang foreman, and Peter Suderman, the superintendent of stevedores, discussed what action to take, Captain Charles de Guillaumin appeared. He stated in intelligible but accented English that he did not want to put out the fire with water because it would ruin the cargo. Instead, he elected to suppress the flames by having the hatches battened down and covered with tarpaulins, the ventilators closed, and the steam system turned on. This was not a stupid decision. This was not the choice of an incompetent captain. This was standard firefighting procedure for ships in 1947. Steam suppression worked. It smothered fires without damaging cargo. It kept holds from filling with water that would ruin everything. It had saved countless ships and cargoes. But steam suppression worked by depriving fire of oxygen. And ammonium nitrate doesn't need oxygen to burn. What Captain de Gilliban didn't know, what no one knew, was that ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer. It produces its own oxygen as it decomposes. The steam didn't extinguish the fire. The steam activated the compound. Heat plus moisture converted the ammonium nitrate to nitrous oxide. A gas. Highly volatile. Explosive. The temperature inside hold number 4 began to rise. The pressure began to build. At Captain de Gilliban's request, stevedores started removing cases of small arms ammunition from hold number 5 as a precautionary measure. As the fire grew, the increased heat forced the stevedores and some crew members to leave the ship. The Grandcamp's whistle sounded an alarm. It was quickly echoed by the siren of the Texas City Terminal Railway Company. Despite a strike by telephone workers, something that would prove catastrophic in the hours to come, Peter Suderman managed to reach the fire department. He called Galveston for a fireboat. It was now about 8:30 a.m. At this point, growing pressure from the compressed steam being fed into hold number 4 blew off the hatch covers. A thick column of orange smoke billowed into the morning sky. Nitrogen dioxide fumes. A chemical signature. The unusual color attracted attention immediately. Several hundred onlookers began gathering a few hundred feet away at the head of the slip. Attracted by the sirens. Attracted by that spectacular orange smoke. Witnesses later described it as a pretty gold, yellow color in the morning sunlight. Beautiful to see. They had no idea they were watching their own deaths approach. 28 men and 4 trucks of the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department arrived on the scene. 27 of the 28 firefighters responded, 1 was on leave. The Republic Oil Refining Company firefighting team followed. They set up their hoses. These men were volunteers. Neighbors. Friends. Men who worked in the refineries and chemical plants during the day, who grabbed their gear and ran toward danger when the siren called. They had families. Children. Wives waiting at home. Within the next hour, 27 of them would be dead. But right now, at 8:45 a.m., they were doing their job. Fighting a fire. Just another day in an industrial port. The crowd grew. 500 people. Maybe more. Many of them children. Families. They stood at what they believed was a safe distance, 200, 300 feet from the ship. Far enough to be safe. Close enough to watch the show. Inside hold number 4, the temperature continued to climb. 750 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature at which ammonium nitrate stops being fertilizer and starts becoming explosive. 850 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the explosive threshold. Around 9 o'clock a.m., the fire appeared to abate slightly. The flames died down. The firefighters felt a moment of hope. But the steam suppression system was still actively heating hold number 4. The chemical reaction was accelerating. Most of the Grandcamp's crew had disembarked. Captain de Gilliban was on the pier, taking a head count. Across the slip, at the Monsanto Chemical Company plant, 450 employees were at work. Normal shift. Normal day. 6,000 feet away, school children sat in classrooms. Windows open to let in the cool April breeze. What happened next would be heard 150 miles away. It would register on seismographs in Denver, Colorado, over 1,000 miles distant. It would create a mushroom cloud 2,000 feet high. It would throw a 2-ton anchor nearly 2 miles. It would kill nearly 600 people in less than 5 seconds. But right now, at 9:11 a.m. and 59 seconds, 500 people stood watching orange smoke. 27 firefighters worked their hoses. Captain de Gilliban checked his roster. Children looked out schoolhouse windows. One more second. 9:12 a.m. The temperature inside hold number 4 reached explosive threshold. The heat had caused the fuel oil bunker, located between hold 3 and hold 4, to rupture. Fuel oil poured onto the hot, decomposing fertilizer. It created an ANFO mixture. Ammonium nitrate fuel oil. The most powerful non-nuclear explosive known to man. The SS Grandcamp detonated. The blast was equivalent to 2.5 kilotons of TNT. 1/5 the power of the atomic bomb that had leveled Hiroshima 2 years earlier. The sound reached Louisiana, 150 miles away. In Port Arthur, Texas, 25 miles distant, the ground shook hard enough to crack foundations. In Galveston, 10 miles across the bay, people were thrown to the pavement. Plate glass storefronts shattered. In Denver, Colorado, over 1,000 miles away, seismographs registered the shock. 2 small planes were circling overhead when the Grandcamp detonated. The blast wave caught them at 2,000 feet. Both aircraft disintegrated. The pilots never knew what hit them. The ship itself, 6,300 tons of steel, ceased to exist. Not destroyed. Not sunk. Vaporized. Within 2,000 feet of the Grandcamp, utter destruction. Everything and everyone obliterated by blast over pressure and heat. Captain Charles de Gilliban was standing on the pier taking a head count. He left no remains. 31 of his 41 crew members were never found. Not bodies. Not fragments. Nothing. The 27 firefighters who had responded to the call were working their hoses near the ship. All 27 died instantly. The Texas City Volunteer Fire Department, 28 men strong, was reduced to 1. Fred Dowdy, who hadn't responded to the initial call because he was across town. The 500 spectators who had gathered to watch the pretty orange smoke, most of them died where they stood. Mothers holding children. Workers on lunch break. Teenagers who had skipped school to watch the excitement. The blast wave moved faster than sound. They never heard it coming. But the explosion itself was only the beginning. The Grandcamp, all 6,300 tons of her, had been transformed into high-velocity shrapnel. Steel plates. Hull fragments. Deck equipment. Machinery. All of it accelerated to supersonic speeds. All of it tumbling through the air like bullets fired from an enormous gun. Some debris reached an altitude of nearly 3 miles before falling back to Earth. The ship's 2-ton anchor was projected from the dock like an artillery shell. It traveled 1.62 miles, 8,575 feet, before slamming into the ground on Pan American property. The impact drove it 10 feet into the soil. Workers found it days later, still radiating heat. The ship's other anchor, 5 tons, landed half a mile away. A 1-ton piece of the propeller shaft traveled 2.5 miles. Steel drill stems from the cargo, 30 feet long, weighing 2,700 pounds each, were found buried 6 feet deep in clay soil at distances of 13,000 feet. Nearly 2.5 miles. This wasn't debris falling. This was artillery bombardment. The blast created a 15-foot tsunami. The wave swept across the dock area, smashing into buildings, carrying debris, drowning those who had survived the initial explosion. Then it receded, dragging bodies and wreckage back into the turning basin. Paradoxically, the wave extinguished some fires. But only temporarily. Because now the reign of fire began. The Grandcamp had been carrying 59,000 bales of sisal twine on deck. The explosion had ignited them and flung them into the sky. Now they fell, burning bales the size of hay, tumbling down across a 2-mile radius like flaming meteors. Where they landed, they started fires. Flying shrapnel, hot steel fragments moving at supersonic speeds, bombarded oil storage tanks, chemical tanks, refineries. Pipes ruptured. Tanks split open. Volatile liquid sprayed into the air and ignited. Across the slip from the Grandcamp, the Monsanto Chemical Company plant took the full force of the blast. 450 employees were on site that morning. 145 of them died instantly. The plant itself, a massive complex of buildings, storage tanks, and processing equipment, was completely destroyed. Chemical storage vessels ruptured. Their contents mixed and ignited. Secondary explosions rippled through the facility. Within 20 blocks of the waterfront, total devastation. 1,000 buildings damaged or destroyed. Every window in Texas City shattered. Not cracked. Blown out. But some people survived. And their accounts would later help investigators piece together what had happened. 112 people within 500 feet of the Grandcamp lived. How they survived remains a mystery. Some were shielded by buildings. Some were in the right position at the right moment. Some were simply lucky. Robert Roten was 13 years old. He was 25 blocks from the blast. The explosion picked him up and threw him like a rag doll. He survived with injuries that would take months to heal. At the high school gymnasium, which would soon become a temporary morgue, windows exploded inward. Students 6,000 feet from the explosion were cut by flying glass. Some would lose eyes. Some would carry scars for life. But they were the lucky ones. Throughout Texas City, people stumbled through smoke and debris, bleeding, disoriented, calling for family members who would never answer. The volunteer fire department's 4 trucks had been parked near the Grandcamp. All 4 were obliterated. Every piece of firefighting equipment the city owned, gone. The water system, destroyed. The power grid, down. The telephone exchange, damaged. And the telephone operators who might have called for help from neighboring cities were on strike. They rushed back to their posts as soon as they heard the explosion. But precious minutes had been lost. Minutes that might have saved lives. Fred Dowdy, the sole surviving Texas City firefighter, took charge. He had no equipment. No trucks. No water pressure. No communication system. But he had training. And he had determination. Within an hour, fire departments from surrounding cities began to arrive. Galveston, Houston, Alvin, Texas City Heights. Eventually, 200 firefighters from as far away as Los Angeles would converge on Texas City. But they faced an impossible situation. Oil refineries were burning. Chemical plants were exploding. Storage tanks were rupturing. And in the main slip, 600 feet from where the Grandcamp had been, another ship was on fire. The SS High Flyer. She had been torn from her moorings by the Grandcamp explosion. The blast had lifted her completely out of the water and slammed her back down. Now she drifted across the harbor, out of control, until she lodged against another vessel, the SS Wilson B. Keene. The High Flyer's cargo, 961 tons of ammonium nitrate. 1,800 tons of sulfur. She was already on fire. Burning debris from the Grandcamp had rained down on her deck. Flaming sisal had ignited her cargo holds. Smoke poured from her hatches. The crew stayed aboard for an hour, trying to fight the fire. But thick, oily smoke and sulfur fumes made it impossible to breathe. The master ordered everyone off the ship. By afternoon, 2 men searching for injured crew members boarded the High Flyer. They found flames coming from one of the holds. They reported it to someone on the waterfront. The message went unheeded for several hours. No one seemed to understand what this meant. Or perhaps everyone was too overwhelmed to process it. The dock area was chaos. Bodies everywhere. Buildings burning. Injured people streaming toward makeshift aid stations. The scope of the disaster was beyond anything anyone had ever seen. Not until 11 o'clock that night, 15 hours after the Grandcamp explosion, did tugboats from Galveston attempt to pull the High Flyer away from the docks. They cut her anchor. They attached tow lines. They poured 4 streams of water onto the flames. None of it worked. The High Flyer wouldn't budge. The force of the Grandcamp explosion had wedged her against the Wilson B. Keene. She was locked in place. At 1:00 a.m., the tugboat crews fled. The fire was too intense. The heat too extreme. They knew what was coming. At 1:10 a.m. on April 17, 16 hours after the first explosion, the SS High Flyer detonated. Witnesses who survived both explosions reported that the second blast was even more powerful than the first. The High Flyer and the Wilson B. Keene, both vessels, vaporized. Incandescent chunks of steel arched high into the night sky. Witnesses described it as a fireworks display. Beautiful and terrible. The debris fell over a wide radius, starting hundreds of new fires. Crude oil tanks that had survived the first explosion now burst into flames. A chain reaction spread through the refineries. Structures that had been damaged but standing collapsed. Rescue workers had evacuated the dock area hours earlier. Few people were killed by the second explosion. But the property damage was catastrophic. The High Flyer's propeller, a massive piece of machined steel, landed nearly a mile inland. It sits today in a memorial park, a monument to forces that humans should never unleash. Fires burned for a week. Black smoke columns were visible 30 miles away. The smell of burning petroleum and chemicals hung over Galveston Bay for days. Body recovery took nearly a month. The temporary morgue was set up in the high school gymnasium. The same gymnasium where students had been cut by flying glass hours earlier. Bodies were laid out in rows. What remained of them? The Houston Identification Bureau worked alongside the Texas Department of Public Safety. Judge G.P. Reddell coordinated with citizens of Texas City. Families came to identify the dead. Some identifications were straightforward. A wedding ring. A distinctive scar. Dental records. Others were impossible. The blast overpressure and heat at Ground Zero had been so extreme that some bodies were unrecognizable as human. Fragments. Bone. Ash. 405 people were identified and claimed by families. 63 bodies could not be identified. They were buried together in a memorial cemetery in June of 1947. Their graves are marked simply, known only to God. 113 people were classified as missing. No identifiable parts were ever found. This figure includes the firefighters who were aboard the Grandcamp when she exploded. It includes spectators who had been standing directly at the slip head. It includes longshoremen who had been working on the dock. Some historians believe the true death toll was higher. Perhaps hundreds higher. Visiting seamen whose ships had been in port. Undocumented laborers. Migrant workers and their families. Travelers passing through. People with no one to report them missing. We'll never know the true number. 5,000 people were injured. 1,884 were admitted to 21 area hospitals. Burns. Crush injuries. Lacerations from flying glass. Shrapnel wounds. Broken bones. 800 people were orphaned or widowed. Among the confirmed dead were people whose names we know. Victor Viemeyer, the funeral director. He had gone to the docks to see if he could help. H. J. Mikeska, president and general manager of the Texas City Terminal Railway. He had been coordinating the emergency response. 19 volunteer firefighters whose names are inscribed on a plaque at Fire Station Number 2. Men who had run toward danger while everyone else ran away. 31 crew members of the Grandcamp. Young men from France who had crossed the Atlantic to help rebuild their country. Several school children. They had been watching from the pier, fascinated by the orange smoke. Longshoremen who had mentioned the warm bags and been told not to worry. Monsanto workers, chemists, engineers, clerks, janitors, who had been at their posts when the wall of steel tore through their building. Republic oil workers. Terminal employees. Sightseers. People whose only mistake was being there that day. The national response was immediate. Governor Beaufort Jester issued a disaster proclamation on April 17. The Texas Department of Public Safety coordinated rescue operations. The American Red Cross organized relief efforts. Roads leading into Texas City were closed except for emergency vehicles. 4,000 relief workers operated in Texas City within 48 hours. Volunteers from surrounding cities. Medical personnel. Engineers. Heavy equipment operators. They set up temporary hospitals. Morgues. Shelters for the suddenly homeless. Donations poured in from across the country. Mafia boss Sam Mascio, who controlled gambling and entertainment in Galveston, organized a benefit concert. He brought in Frank Sinatra, Phil Harris, and Ann Sheridan. The event raised tens of thousands of dollars. But no amount of money could bring back the dead. The investigations began immediately. The United States Coast Guard, the Bureau of Mines, the Fire Prevention and Engineering Bureau of Texas, the National Board of Fire Underwriters. All of them descended on Texas City to determine what had happened and why. The findings were damning. The fire had likely started from a cigarette. No smoking signs had been posted aboard the Grandcamp, but only in French. Not in English. Dockworkers and crew members smoked regularly in the cargo holds. Out of ignorance or apathy, no one enforced the rules. The ammonium nitrate had been manufactured at government ordnance plants. It was packaged in bags with rosin, petroleum, and paraffin, substances that lowered the combustion temperature. Some bags tore during loading. Loose fertilizer fell onto zinc-coated bilge pipes. The metal reacted with the chemical compound. The bags had been stored at higher than normal temperatures before being loaded onto the ship. This increased the reactivity of the ammonium nitrate. The longshoremen had noticed. They had reported it. Nothing was done. Captain de Gilliban's decision to use steam suppression instead of water had accelerated the disaster. The steam added heat and moisture to a compound that was already unstable. It converted ammonium nitrate to nitrous oxide, a highly volatile gas. Pressure built. Temperature rose. The chemical reaction became irreversible. When the fuel oil bunker ruptured from the heat, fuel oil poured onto the decomposing fertilizer. It created an ANFO mixture, ammonium nitrate fuel oil, the most powerful non-nuclear explosive known. The Grandcamp had been a floating bomb. And no one had known it. The lawsuits began in 1948. Over 3,000 claims were filed against the United States government. The fertilizer had come from government ordnance plants. The government had approved it for civilian use. The government had certified it as safe. The case, Dale Height vs. United States, consolidated 8,485 individual claims. It became one of the most significant legal battles in American history. The plaintiffs argued that the government had been negligent. That proper regulations had existed but weren't enforced. That the Coast Guard had failed to inspect the cargo. That the Interstate Commerce Commission had failed to classify ammonium nitrate correctly. That the Army had failed to warn about the dangers. The government argued that it couldn't be held liable. That the disaster was an act of God. That no one could have predicted it. The case dragged through courts for years. In 1956, Congress passed a special act. $16.5 million would be distributed to claimants. 1,400 people received compensation. An average of $11,000 each. For a dead husband. A dead child. A lifetime of injuries. $11,000. In 1962, the United States Supreme Court refused to review an appeals court ruling that the Republic of France, owner of the Grandcamp, could not be held liable. The case was closed. But the disaster brought changes. New regulations were implemented for chemical manufacturing. Standards for bagging, handling, and shipping hazardous materials. Ammonium nitrate was officially classified as a high explosive. Storage temperature requirements were mandated. Proper labeling became law. Shipping restrictions were put in place. Maritime safety regulations were overhauled. Emergency response protocols were developed. Disaster coordination systems were established. The lessons learned at Texas City would save lives in future disasters. But they came too late for the 581 confirmed dead. Today, if you visit Texas City, you'll find a memorial park. At its center sits the 2-ton anchor from the SS Grandcamp. The anchor that was thrown 1.62 miles and buried 10 feet in the soil. In 1962, it was transformed into a monument. Nearby stands a marble angel, wings spread, head bowed, honoring the 28 firefighters who died. Their names are inscribed on a plaque. Men who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. Behind the angel lies a small cemetery. 63 graves. Unmarked except for simple stones. The unidentified dead. Known only to God. The propeller of the SS High Flyer sits near the Texas City dike, a jagged piece of steel, a reminder of the second explosion that compounded an already unimaginable tragedy. The city rebuilt. Housing went up. Docks were reconstructed. Warehouses and chemical plants reopened. By 1950, most of the physical scars had healed. The population today exceeds 50,000. Children play in parks where debris once rained from the sky. Ships dock at piers where the Grandcamp once sat. Life goes on. But the lessons of April 16, 1947, remain urgent. In 1995, a truck bomb destroyed the federal building in Oklahoma City. 168 people died. The explosive, ammonium nitrate mixed with fuel oil. ANFO. The same compound that destroyed the Grandcamp. In 2020, a massive explosion devastated the port of Beirut, Lebanon. 218 people died. Over 7,000 injured. The cause, 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored improperly in a port warehouse for 7 years. The compound had been sitting in warm, humid conditions, just like the bags aboard the Grandcamp. We're still learning this lesson. Or rather, we're still failing to learn it. The chemistry teacher who ran toward the docks shouting warnings knew immediately what was happening. The longshoremen who reported warm bags knew something was wrong. The stevedores who asked if they should use water knew the fire was dangerous. But expertise was dismissed by authority. Working-class concerns were waved away by management. Warnings were ignored in favor of protecting cargo. This pattern repeats throughout industrial disasters. The people who do the work know the dangers. The people who make decisions prioritize profit. Captain Charles de Gilliban wasn't evil. He used accepted procedure. He made a reasonable decision based on the information he had. He didn't know his cargo was explosive because no one told him. The longshoremen who laughed at the chemistry teacher weren't fools. They trusted that if the cargo was dangerous, someone would have warned them. They believed the bags labeled fertilizer contained just fertilizer. The 500 spectators who gathered to watch the pretty orange smoke weren't stupid. They thought they were at a safe distance. They thought the firefighters had everything under control. They thought it was just another dockside fire. At 9:12 a.m. on April 16, 1947, they learned otherwise. The explosion was heard 150 miles away. It registered on seismographs 1,000 miles distant. It created a mushroom cloud 2,000 feet high. It killed nearly 600 people in less than 5 seconds. The anchor sits in Memorial Park today, 3,200 pounds of twisted steel, a reminder that the distance between routine and catastrophe can be measured in degrees Fahrenheit. Between 750 degrees, where ammonium nitrate is fertilizer, and 850 degrees, where it becomes an explosive. 100 degrees. 17 minutes. 581 lives. If you found this investigation into America's deadliest industrial disaster compelling, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into catastrophic failures and institutional negligence. The unidentified dead rest together in Texas City Memorial Cemetery. 63 graves under the Texas sun. No names. No ages. No epitaphs. Just a simple marker, known only to God. They were longshoremen and firefighters, school children and spectators, French sailors and American workers, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. They watched the burning ship from the docks. They thought they were safe. They weren't.